I want you all for a minute, if you would, well, only if this applies to you, raise your hands if you have siblings. Okay, now just get them in mind for a moment, would you? Just get your siblings in mind for a moment. Just get all of their uniquenesses and their qualities and their quirks and their idiosyncrasies. Just get them in mind. Aren't they annoying? I mean, right from an early, I have fair dues. I have an elder brother and a younger sister. And right from the moment I can remember having any memory at all, I was always blown away by how different I was from them. I mean, right from didn't you get that? You just were immediately aware of how different you were from your brothers or your sisters. My brother and my sister both happen to be very musical. Me, I seem to have the musical gene surgically removed at birth somehow. I was more athletic than my brother. My sister was more athletic than both of us. In fact, annoying for brothers, but she took her musical ability and her athletic ability and became a professional ballet dancer for 20 years. That's ballet, not belly dancer. Important distinction, I think, to make clear. But ballet dancer for 20 years. That was ballet, in case you're wondering what that was. That was me doing ballet. She became the dancer. I didn't, as you can see. Other differences slightly less obvious. I think I was more persistent than maybe my brother. He was more conceptual. There were differences in terms of how well we could make someone laugh, what our conceptual ability was, how strategic, but just very small differences. And rather like you, I just felt from a very early age that the whole point of my life would be to find ways to identify what my uniquenesses were and figure out ways to employ them. I don't know where that would happen in my life or in my home or in my company, but I just felt as though the whole point of my life was oriented around this discipline. If we can put that one up, that I would build around my strengths and then find ways to manage around the stuff that I didn't have. I didn't have some of the stuff my brother had, and I didn't have some of the stuff my sister had. And so I've always felt, just from the get-go, whether I would have characterized it just that way, I don't know, but I always felt from an early age I was unique. I would have to find some place in which I could exploit that uniqueness. And I bet most of you, I don't want to speak for all of you, but I bet most of you on some level have felt something like that. You felt some uniqueness in you. You kind of knew it from a very early age. And you probably felt as though the purpose of your life was to figure out where are my strengths and how can I make a contribution around those strengths while managing around the weaknesses that I have. I bet most of you in this room feel that way. But if you do feel that way, I'm here to tell you that you're in a minority. As some of you may know, 7 years ago, I wrote a book, which maybe some of you have read, called Now Discover Your Strengths. In that book, there was a poll. It's one of the beautiful things about working for Gallup is if you had a question, you wouldn't have to sit around arguing about it. You could say, well, let's go ask everybody. Which is a powerful conversation ender over dinner. Let's just go ask everybody. We'll come back tomorrow. I'll tell you the answer. So here was the question that we asked. This is back in 2000. Remember, here's the question we asked everybody. Which do you think will help you be most successful in life? However you define success. Building on your strengths or fixing your weaknesses? Yeah. We know you both got strengths and you've got weaknesses. And if you can't ignore one or the other, but if you're going to come down on one side or the other, which side would you come down on? And we didn't ask everybody. We asked representative samples of the populations of the US, the UK, France, Canada, China, and Japan. So it was a lot of people. If right now you're thinking that the whole focus of your life from the time you were very young has been to identify your strengths and contribute them, if you're thinking that, if you're sitting there right now thinking that, you'd been a minority in every single country Gallup studied. Turns out the United States is the most strengths-focused nation in the world. This is back in 2000. Back in 2000, this was the percentage of people, the blue bar was the percentage of people who said, fixing my weaknesses, and the gold bar, people who said building on my strengths. 41% of people in America in 2000 said leverage my strengths. 59% of people said fixing my weaknesses. In Britain, where I'm from, that gold bar, 38% of people would bet their career, their success, their contribution, their service, their significance on leveraging their strengths. 38%. Canada, 38%. France, Well, who cares about France? That was a joke. That's a little something I flatter myself to call English humor. Some of you may not be familiar with English humor. Some of you may think it's a contradiction in terms, like English cuisine. But it does exist. It does exist, seriously. If I use it again, if you're listening along and you're thinking, well, was that supposed to be funny? Was it not supposed to be funny? If the hand goes up, if I raise my hand like this, it was hysterical. Okay? Just get the ground rules set. All right? So France, 35% of people said strengths, all the way down to the two least strengths-focused nations in the world, Japan and China. Japan and China, that gold bar in Japan and China is 24%. So 24% of people in those countries would bet their career, their success, their contribution, their service on leveraging their strengths. So, with all apologies to Madonna, it appears we live in a remedial world, right? We live in a world that is fascinated by weaknesses and tends to take strengths for granted. Everywhere you look, we seem to think that excellence, whatever that is just the opposite of failure. If you want to understand excellence, study failure. So, in order to learn about health, we study disease. In order to learn about joy and meaning and fulfillment and wisdom, we study depressed people. In order to learn about, seriously, how to engage our employees, we study the disengaged employees. In order to learn about great marriage, we study divorce. Everywhere you look, we seem to think that good is just the opposite of bad. If you want to get good, study bad and invert it. We're wrong. You study bad and invert it, you get not bad. Right? And that's just different than good or great. I mean, if you study, let's say you studied a bunch of divorced people. You know what you'd find? If you study divorced people, or people that are really unhappily married, let's just leave it at that. Study people that are really unhappily married, you find that unhappily married people argue a lot. I know. Shocking, but it's true. It's true. Write this down. No one's writing this down. Write this down. But the strange thing is you study really happily married people and you find they argue just as much. The difference between a great marriage and a not so great marriage is what goes on in the space between the arguments. My point is whatever that is, and I don't know what that is. If my wife were here, she certainly would say I don't know exactly what that is because I'm no expert on marriage. My point is simply that if you wanted to learn about what makes an excellent marriage, you'll learn nothing about it from studying the rotten ones. You only learn about excellence from studying excellence. Well, as some of you know, and some of you have been on this train with me and with others for a while. And in fact, I wrote that book, Now Discover Your Strengths, sort of to fight against this idea that we ought to study failure to learn about excellence, and instead we should study strengths and success to learn about them. And I wrote the first line of the book, of the Now Discover Your Strengths book, the one that was written 7 years ago now, was one of those lines that you write as a writer. You write it for you, sort of to get started. And I wrote this first line for me, sort of to get me going. I thought it would get cut out, but it wasn't cut out. It's still there. The first line of the book was, we wrote this book to start a strengths revolution. Well, you know, it's been 7 years now since that book came out. And all kinds of changes have occurred. You've probably seen some of those changes. Positive psychology. Who's familiar with positive psychology? Some of you maybe. A whole new movement in psychology. Martin Seligman began it. He was the past president of the American Psychological Association. He famously said, psychology's got it all wrong. We've got 40,000 studies on depression and less than 400 on joy. It's not that we shouldn't study depression, it's just that we ought to learn about joy and we ought to study it. A whole new movement in psychology has begun called positive psychology. And to know how powerful it is today, know this: the most popular elective class of any class on any subject at Harvard is an introduction to positive psychology. The United Nations used to characterize nations according to their vulnerabilities. Today it's changed so that today the United Nations characterizes countries according to their strengths. If your child happens to break the law in this country, they'll now be given a strengths assessment for juvenile justice, where they'll be asked strengths-based questions like, have you made any good changes in the past? If you made any changes today, who'd be the first person to notice those changes? You look around the world, you see all kinds of signs of change. If your family's in trouble and you go to family therapy in Australia or New Zealand, they'll take a strengths-based approach to helping you fix your family by figuring out, well, let's just start with what strengths do you have as a family? all the way around. I mean, if you Google the word strength space back in 2000, you know how many hits you got? If you Google it back in 2000, you got none. You know why? Google didn't exist back then. Some of you not following along, but that's okay. It's okay. Today, if you Google the word strength space, you get 42 million hits. The world's changing. And I tell you what, if you really wanted to change the world, I mean, if you really wanted to change the world so it was strength-based, not remedial, of course, the place where you'd begin is in schools, wouldn't you? You'd go to schools and you'd try and teach the kids how to think a wee bit differently. Because frankly, by the time I get people like you, you're far too old for me to do anything with. I'm sorry. We want to start early, don't we, with kids going, what are my strengths? I mean, I was probably 6 or 7 when I first felt, you know, I've got something to bring. Can I name it? Can I talk about it? Can I apply it? I was young. Let's start early with kids. And the funny thing is, if you charge around the country looking for a strengths-based curriculum, a strengths-based school, you know what you find? You find tons of great teachers and tons of great students, and you find no strengths-based schools. You'll find no strengths-based curriculum. You'll see some signs of it somewhere really early on, sometimes in Montessori, but you don't find strengths-based schools. At least I hadn't, until I came back to my office last October, and I found on my desk a stack of 60 letters, handwritten, from the students of a school in New Jersey. And they'd seen a film series that I'd done with the folks who did the Numa films called Trombone Player Wanted. And it's a 6-part film series, and they'd seen the first part of this 6-part film series. And I hadn't done it for school children, but somehow the headmistress had got a hold of it and played it to the girls of this school. And they'd watched it, and then they'd written to me saying, come here, come to Purnell, come to this school. We do things differently at this school. And it took a while to get everything worked out in terms of schedules, but I went up to Purnell in New Jersey and filmed a bunch of stuff. I wanted to show you a brief clip of what's going on in this school, if for no other reason than this. And this is how the headmistress described the school to me. She goes, in every single school in the country, in every single public school, there's a room where children go if they have trouble learning. There's a room where they go if they've got ADD or ADHD or dyslexia. There's a room they go. Our whole school is that room. This is a school for children who have struggled to succeed anywhere else. They've been told repeatedly that they have no strengths, nothing to offer. They have a big F on their back. And we found a way to help them discover that perhaps without being condescending and just being all about self-esteem, we found a way to help those girls look in the mirror and say, I do have something to contribute. Well, I was completely sold. She's a passionate person who's done some extraordinary things. Let's take a moment just to watch a 4-minute clip of what's going on in this one small school in New Jersey. Darren, can we go ahead and play that Purnell clip, please?
Girls with learning differences are out there growing exponentially. There's 1 in 5 girls out there and boys who are being diagnosed with learning disabilities. They go off, they get testing, and then there's nothing for them to do except fail.
Schools to me were just one big maze. You know, I had to find my way out of things. I raised my hand and asked my teacher a question, and it was like he completely ignored me. My last school couldn't find what was wrong. And they also didn't seem to want to commit. They were like, well, maybe you'll catch up later. I didn't feel smart enough or good enough.
I was told I was stupid and that I could never get anything done, so I just stopped going altogether.
A lot of times when they feel demoralized and their self-esteem starts to go down, they take their strengths and they put them in areas that are not good for them.
I just got involved in a lot of life-threatening, risky stuff.
I felt lost.
My school system would not decide if I was extremely smart or extremely stupid. They would, they noticed that I was really excelling, first grade, and they put me in the gifted and talented program. Right after that, they put me on Ritalin because I wasn't paying attention in class because I was bored.
What do you think would have happened to you if you hadn't come here?
I would either be living in my house, never leaving, never going to school, drop out, or I'd be dead.
You think you'd be that?
Dead, yes. I'm 98% sure that I would not be here living anymore.